Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Adriaan Palm and I'm the Dutch ambassador. A warm welcome to you all at today's webinar on developing safe rural cycling infrastructure. This is a theme close to my heart and a road down memory lane. I made my first multi-day cycling trip when I graduated from primary school, and at age 12, together with a classmate without parents, went from camping to camping using the Dutch rural cycling infrastructure. I'm grateful that today we have 4 speakers: Catriona Corr of Rural Cycling Collective and Kilkenny County Council, Robert Burns, Director of Infrastructure and Climate Change at Llanderry Ruthdale County Council, and the man behind many of the cycle roads put up in the county in recent months, Erik Nijland, Director of Fietsplatform, or in English, Bicycle Platform, and George van Duren, cycling consultant at Dutch company Royal Haskoning. They will each speak for about 5 to 10 minutes. And after this, we have the chance to hear questions from you, our audience. Please submit those questions through the chat function on your screens. And as we have many participants from Ireland and elsewhere today, please keep your questions brief and include your name and organization you represent if possible. Please note that today's session is being recorded and that all the presentations from speakers, as well as of the question and answers, will be on the record. The slideshow presentations you'll see will be shared with you after the webinar. If you use social media, please include Dutch Irish Cycling. And I would like to thank you again for joining us today. And I look forward to a stimulating and informative discussion. I will now pass the floor over to our first speaker, Catriona. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present the Rural Vision today. And I will now share my screen with you. Is that okay? Can you all see that? Firstly, I would just like to thank Joe Sachs-Eldridge, who compiled the presentation for the official launch last week by Malcolm Noonan, Minister of State for Heritage and Electoral Reform. So over the last few months, we have seen some great changes to infrastructure in Ireland, and thanks to some good decisions, Dublin has seen some real shifts in travel behaviour. Here in rural Ireland, we have some beautiful and very popular greenways. Lockdown and travel restrictions have given us a real taste of how different things could be on our rural roads. And now really is the time to build on that foundation, to start to enable people in rural Ireland to cycle for everyday journeys, and journeys that begin at their front door, not their car door. We know there is a huge appetite for this. In Kilkenny, we have seen groups that up until now have been absent as cyclists. Teenage girls have reclaimed their space on our streets, and across the population, we have witnessed a multimodality that hasn't been visible for years. To capitalise on this shift and to facilitate people to cycle for these everyday journeys, we need to change the focus. We need to look beyond the big cities, and we need to recognise that in rural Ireland, greenways are not the only answer. The Rural Cycling Collective came together to focus on the specific needs of rural Ireland. These groups represent communities in Leitrim, Sligo, Wexford, Carlow, across the country, and of course my own county, Kilkenny. Based on our collective knowledge, experience and ideas, we created a shared vision and a clear set of 8 asks, a clear way forward for cycling to once again become a normal way to get around for everyday journeys. These 8 asks can be put into 2 broad categories. And firstly, it's a shift in a change in the way we do things. We need to move to an approach that is much more strategic. And the first step in this strategic approach is mapping networks and identifying ambitious, comprehensive and connected networks in every county. Local authorities are best placed to do this, but in conjunction and collaboration with the experts, the cyclists and the local communities. These maps can then be used as the basis of engagement with the communities, for funding bodies, for engineers, for programs of work, and for everyone needed to make them a reality. They can be used to make the absolute best use of funding that is available. These network plans can be used to carry out advanced design work that gives time for great collaboration and great consultation with all members of the community. We don't want to settle for good enough. We don't just want to cater for the brave and the bold. We want to bring everybody on this journey. And strategic network plans are a crucial first step in making that happen. The second category then is to focus on the environment, both the physical and the social environment, changing the way we use them, lower speed limits near our schools, near our urban centres, safer routes to school so that children can experience the journey to school by bike. Cycle training for all road users, cyclists and cars, so that we can all use the road safely. And that people on bikes will be expected and respected on our rural roads. Sometimes we don't always need major infrastructure projects. Sometimes we just need to change the social environment. Here in rural Ireland, we have an enviable network of rural roads. Bohers in Irish, and a boher originally means that the road is wide enough for 2 cows to pass. These bohers can become rucher roads, roads where cyclists are expected and where cars travel at a speed that they can react to a cyclist around the corner. In Kilkenny, we have 2 examples of schools that are trying to find unique solutions. In this first school here, the school created a park and stride zone. And then once that was done, their problem was infrastructure. Once that problem was dealt with, communication campaign went out to the parents to remove the cars from the school gates and to actually make space for pedestrians and cyclists. But many partners were involved. The nearby landowners, Kilkenny Agricultural Society, the council, Cartoon Saloon, our local animation, our much celebrated animation company, the guards, and of course the school community. And this has transformed the school gate on this school. The second school has been building a culture over the last number of years through cycle education, motivational challenges, encouragement, rewards, and role models in the school, first and foremost the principal. These are 2 very different solutions because every solution will be unique. What we need is bespoke solutions. We need to find high quality solutions for every route, and this takes time, so we need to start right now. Collaborations will work, resulting in safe spaces for all road users, a reduction in car dependency, and most importantly, an increase in independent travel for our children, for people with disabilities, and for all vulnerable road users. So what are the next steps? The next steps are to create those ambitious strategic plans for every county, to review speed limits across the county in our urban centres, outside our schools, and on our rural roads. We need to work together to make this happen. We need to collaborate. At cyclist.ie, we will continue the discussion. We will continue to bring people together to harness their collective talents and knowledge. We can revitalise rural communities by reconnecting people with their streets, with their local environments, and ultimately with their neighbours, with each other. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Burns. I'm Director of Service with Dún Laoghaire Down County Council. And I'm just going to be going through, I suppose, my take on how we can develop safe rural cycling infrastructure in Ireland. And I've decided not to focus on maybe those inter-urban routes. I think that Eric and Soares may focus on. So I'm looking at it in a slightly different way. And I'm just going to have an introduction, maybe a discussion about how mobility and livability relates to one another, and look at how we can maybe carry out some of these interventions in a typical village setting, and then just some conclusions to round off. Just a little bit about myself. While I work in an urban local authority, or was perceived to be an urban local authority, I'm originally from the country myself. So I grew up, I cycled on kind of ropey roads when I was from 7 years of age, so I know what it's like. And I think sometimes we look at the past and think things were always better, but I do remember it being quite challenging when I was cycling, but I kept at it. I work in Dún Laoghaire. I actually live in a rural area in Dún Laoghaire, so I'll go into that a bit later. About a third of our area is actually rural, and very rural. It's in a mountainous area. As I said, I'm a director here, but before this I worked in Clare County Council, so I've plenty experience of rural environments, and I worked in transportation and roads when I was there, so quite a good understanding of the challenges that a lot of rural local authorities will face. At the moment, I'm program manager for our COVID-19 projects, and also program manager for our stimulus package funded by the NTA. And so I've worked on quite a few projects in the last 6 months. Blackrock Village, Dundrum, Glasstool, where we carried out very significant public realm interventions, coastal mobility route, and we've recently, in the last couple of months, started work on active school travel initiatives, and we have very recently put out 3 new routes for public engagement. So we've been very busy. We have a good team here, and we see active mobility as something that's really important, and not just in an urban setting for us, but actually also rural as well. I manage some other areas as well as part of my role here. So just in terms of Dún Laoghaire Down County Council area, because I guess there is a perception that it must be urban and or very suburban, but looking at the map, and that red line shows the boundary of our county, it's clear maybe a third or maybe more is actually quite rural. And you can even see from the satellite map, that's fields that are there in that kind of lower southwest area of the map. And really anywhere that's kind of south or west of the M50 is pretty much rural. And then it sort of blends into the suburban area as you move further east and north. So our population overall is 220,000 or so. It's a relatively small area. We're actually the smallest county of a county council in Ireland in terms of area. Population density 1,700, and as I said, about a third is rural. So it might be something that comes as a surprise to people. And I think some of the other local authorities in Dublin would have similar breakdown. South Dublin County Council and Fingal, and probably even a higher proportion of rural areas. So rural cycling is something that is a concern for Dublin local authorities as much as it is for local authorities outside of Dublin. And just to get a sense of what our network consists of, because it's a good starting point to look at the roads network. We have about 780 kilometres of national, regional, and local roads. You can see the breakdown there. But when we look at the overall context, there's about 100,000 kilometres of road in Ireland nationally, so very significant. And ours is really just as a drop in the bucket, really, when you compare it to other local authorities. About 1,400 kilometres of footpath and about 250 kilometres of cycleway. Now that's a mix of on-road, segregated, off-road, could include what's in parks. And we are planning to do a survey next year to fully catalogue what we have and classify it, and to look at the condition surveys as well for that. But like just looking at the roads, I mean, you know, the biggest proportion of roads nearly in any local authority will be the local roads. You know, that'll be your local primary, local secondary, local tertiary. Any local authority staff on here will be very familiar with the challenges of trying to maintain a very large network in a relatively with a relatively low population base, and that's a challenge in and of itself. And so we should consider that when we look at cycling. So this is something I'm very interested in terms of how does mobility interact with livability, or the sense of people-centered places. So if we just look at mobility, and walking, cycling, public transport, use of private vehicles. We kind of understand that there are different elements of that, different pressures, different reasons why we choose certain modes. We're looking at safety, we're looking at sustainability, we're looking at health and well-being, and they're all very important. Safety is very important, it's crucial, because we know this year there's been a 12% increase in road fatalities on our roads, yet we've had a massive reduction in traffic volumes and in journeys during COVID, which is quite shocking. And a third of those fatalities almost were pedestrians and cyclists. So we have a serious safety issue, and I think we need to be careful that we don't get desensitized to that. It's still really critical, and it's quite shocking. And I don't think there's any level of collision, injury, or fatality that should be considered acceptable. Sustainability is something we readily accept and need for climate action. We need to consider carefully the modes we use and our own health and well-being. And I guess during COVID, we've seen the value of active mobility in particular, how that helps with our physical health and our mental health. But I think there is a bigger picture. There's something more fundamental, and I would see it as centered around livability, this interaction between people, space, and time. There are plenty of proponents of this at the moment. Carlos Moreno has talked about the 15-minute city. Jan Gehl, Danish architect, was very prominent and vocal in terms of advocating for this. So livability, people-centered spaces. Now, I don't intend to go into too much of that, but I do believe this should be at the core. We need to consider not only mobility, but how attractive, how livable are our places where we live, particularly towns and villages, and in this context, rural towns and villages. So there's just some photos from recent projects we've been working on, and we'd like to think we've transformed a lot of the places where we are here in Dún Laoghaire, and that's Blackrock Village 2020, the coastal mobility route. And it's interesting with the coastal route, there are children going home from school, so shows you that this has been used for many different reasons, and it still comes back to that idea of livability, you know, doing things that are relatively close to where you live, being able to go to school within a couple of kilometers, and being able to use active modes. But is it new? Have we only come across that? Are we rediscovering it? And I guess something I was looking through, and from my time in Clare County Council, I remember seeing these photos up in some shops, and that's 1954. And I mean, Ennisnow, anyone that knows it, is very different to that. And I know they've had some interventions there in mobility, but that sense of space, you just wouldn't see it. And you can see how people are filling that space and how at ease they are. And I guess that photo in the top right is quite iconic. It's also telling a story, isn't it? Something really profound is happening there. So are we rediscovering livability? Have we moved away from it for some reason? And do we need to get back to it? I thought I might just look at a typical village in our county. So Sandyford Village is it's about 10 kilometers, 10 kilometers from the city centre. It's in close to the Dublin Mountains. There's a mix of residential, other uses, and a lot of development has taken place there during recent years. But it's still a village that's largely rural in character. But you can see how development is coming in around it. And we've been looking at this village as part of Town and Village Renewal Scheme, and we've made an application on it, so it's just at application stage. But I thought it would be worthwhile just going through it, because I believe that at the heart of what we're doing, we need to get our towns and villages right first before we really start looking at connecting them. So there's a fundamental issue in terms of livability and mobility in our villages and towns. So I think we need a holistic approach, and maybe look at a hub and spoke model where the village is the hub. We work on that, and our roots are the spokes, and we work out from that and connect them all up. And this is the vision we had for Sandyford Village. And I think this is important because the really good thing about livability and public realm is you start to create a vision for what a place might look like. And you're really connecting on an emotional level with people as well, saying this is what is possible. This is what my village can look like. Because if you ask people in a village, would you like cycle lanes? They may say yes, or what about traffic, what about parking? But if you ask them, do they want to make their village more attractive? Do they want to make it a nicer place to shop in or to visit? Do they want to make it more livable? I think most people would say yes. So maybe that's the way we should approach this conversation. That's my argument anyway. So not to get into the detail of it, but when we're looking at livability, what we do start to look at is at mobility within that. So we're looking at making this village, calming the traffic through the village. We're looking at making the streets narrower in order to do that. Looking at making the footpaths wider. We're looking at incorporating bike parking, so to promote active mobility. But we're also looking at expanding the public space to make it more desirable for people to want to spend time there, to rest there. And we would think then, obviously, want to shop there, to spend their money. And I think there is a strong relationship between being relaxed and wanting to spend time in a village or town and actually wanting to spend money. And I think it also allows us to have a conversation about how cars or traffic interacts with the village. Because then there's a conversation about how you use the space. So if you're using the space to expand the public realm and make it more attractive, then you can negotiate with the local community on maybe reducing car parking or traffic through the village. So there's a level of detail in this, and I don't really intend to go into it, and it's still at a draft stage. But I was just trying to point out that these are the possibilities that when you start looking at livability, you can bring in the mobility elements into that discussion and have a more rounded, holistic review in an urban setting, particularly rural towns and villages. And this is just a model we're working on in terms of delivering mobility and public realm projects, and we believe this is something that might have an application outside of where we are. We can do things relatively quickly, but we can engage, but we continue to engage. We do it in a dynamic way. This may or may not work everywhere, and to be honest, we're still trialing it in DLR, but we do think we need to keep trying new things. We need to innovate, to try and ensure that projects progress as quick as they can, but also bringing on board everybody that wants to have a view or who would be impacted by the project. So to bring along politicians, the businesses, residents, the wider community and stakeholders. And just to finish off, in terms of my own conclusions, I think rural walking and cycling, we need to consider both. We just can't look at cycling on its own, but we need to look at networks that are safe and comprise a connected network, not just disparate elements. And I think that's been one of our shortcomings to date. We have some very good sections, but they're not fully connected. We need to consider mobility and public realm together and focus on a livability and a people-centered approach, because I think there's a better chance of bringing local communities along with us if we do that. Rural towns and villages are integral to, I think, a strategy for developing rural walking and cycling. I can't see how they could be left out of it. A lot of our shops, our schools, the destinations where people want to go to or cycle to or walk to are actually in our towns and villages. So it's critical. I think maybe a hub and spoke model could be used. We could maybe address the hubs, towns and villages first, but there's no reason why it couldn't be done in parallel if there was a strategy or a plan in place. And engagement is crucial. I mean, nobody's suggesting that this goes on unilaterally, that the government or a local authority just implements this. We need engagement, and so how best that engagement can take place. It needs to take place at an early stage and throughout the development of plans and implementation. And even that project on Sandyford, that involved very extensive engagement with the local community, businesses, residents, community groups, and elected members. So it just didn't happen at the whim, let's say, of the executive of the local authority. We need to look at an evidence-based approach. We need ongoing review and evaluation. I think it's one of our shortcomings as well in Ireland that we don't have enough of data on public realm and mobility interventions in an Irish setting and in a more modern setting. We're looking to the UK or to Europe, and you'd have to wonder how applicable that is and how relevant. And I think it's always more difficult to convince people about evaluations that have taken place, let's say, in the Netherlands or Denmark, and try and say that they can apply to Ireland. So I think we need our own evidence-based data based on the interventions we've carried out. I do think we need a clearer policy steer from a national and local level, and hopefully that will come. And there's a lot of different elements. It'd be great if they came together. I think that all local authorities were clear on what they were expected to do. And in the end, my view is that we should be prioritising to meet the needs of locals and daily walkers and cyclists, but that there are synergies then with greenways and walking trails and leisure tourism initiatives that could bring about a win-win. But we really need to look after the needs of locals, make sure that school children can get to school, people can get to work, people can socialise, meet their go for their appointments, whatever it is. And I think if we do that, we probably will have catered to a very large degree for the needs of visitors and tourists. And so maybe linking up greenways with networks in our towns and villages and between our towns and villages, really what we should focus on, because I think everyone will win in the end. So that's all from me. That's just we're doing our active school travel initiative at the moment. We have routes out there, so any DLR people who have an interest, the public engagement is open on that. And I'm sure if you're interested, you'll be able to make a submission. So that's all from me. I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm George van Duren. I'm working for Royal ESCO in DHV. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about safe rural cycling infrastructure in the Netherlands with some experiences and examples from the Netherlands. But first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm delighted that I get to speak to people in Ireland, a place I've been to quite often and which I really love. I would like to write here more. Let's start off with some interesting pictures. When people talk about cycling in the Netherlands, they always show happy, confident, comfortable people with very good weather. Well, the weather actually is, I guess, mostly the same as Ireland. My partner just took her bike out in the drizzling rain to visit a friend 2 kilometers away. So the weather is not always as good as we picture. And the conditions, well, are not always as good as we picture either, because this is also our reality. We build some of the finest and biggest motorways in Europe, maybe even in the world. And we are, from policy point of view, very much a car-focused country. And I'm saying this because it makes sense to compare the context. When we're planning cycling projects in the Netherlands, we really have to think about the car usage. And in our policies, we a lot of national policies are aimed at improving the flow of car traffic. So we have to adhere to that. When we look at our network for cycling and when we develop it, we do identify a couple of routes. We say we've got main routes. That's where the highest level of safety is needed. That's where we also place the most investments. But in order to be able to reach all destinations, you need a basic network of a finer grade network to go somewhere. And of course, there is a recreational use, which you can actually really combine really well with the basic network or main network and combining functionalities. An example of this is route development is in Nijmegen. If you talk about cycling, usually you say, okay, let's make things safer alongside arterials, but you can also say, let's move away from the arterials and see what smaller roads are available. And I just heard the term roads are roads, and I think those really provide opportunities for safer cycling infrastructure, but it's also based on the network design. So you look at your road, and then you say, okay, what kind of function has this? And if you define the main roads for cars, you can also define the network which is able for cycling, and then define which measures you want to take. And that's why we categorize in the Netherlands our roads really well. And when we say, okay, for example, the connector road, the 80 road, that's a main car road, and we need segregated cycling infrastructure there. And we actually try to develop a network in a way that we disentangle car use and cyclist use. So this is an example of Delft, where you see in red the main car network on the left, and on the right you see the main cycling network. So we really designed those two networks apart in order to find safe spots to ride. And then this, for example, is a regional development between Arnhem and Nijmegen, which has rural parts and urban parts in it. And to provide focus, we said, okay, let's focus on a few major projects where we say, okay, that's where we're going to invest in. And so reconstruction of these roads is like this, using this road and transferring it to a cycling way. But really important in this, and this week I was in Germany, and we did a feasibility study for a cycling highway, is also how you present the projects. Are you talking about cycling highways, or are you talking about improving cycling infrastructure? And the problem in Germany is they talk about Radschnellwege, which means cycling motorways, roughly translated, and then you get opposition. So your framing and the way you put forward your project is important. Otherwise, you will get local opposition, even for cycling projects. And when designing these cycling projects, I think the main goal in the rural side is to provide safety, make it safe for people to travel from A to B. Try to use as many rural roads as possible, and within the towns, identify once again the main network of roads where you can ride safely, and try to disentangle from the main roads also going through the towns, if possible. And then you can redesign roads which look like this, where people actually can meet, where you can see people you know walking the dogs, etc. And so the reconfiguration looks like this. And when you don't have the possibility to use local roads, you have to go alongside national roads. This is an example from the Netherlands, with clearly segregated cycling infrastructure. And you really don't want to be in a place like this, is in Austria, where you're being overtaken by cars which are allowed to drive 100 kilometers an hour. People with, in these clothings, race cyclists might feel comfortable, but most cyclists, and especially kids, elderly, won't feel confident to ride there. Same goes for these roads from Ireland. This is kind of a slip road, but you see cars use them to overtake passing cars, so it really doesn't feel safe. Same here. Try to build these safe connections between towns where you are really segregated from the cars. And I know this is a big challenge, but also look at from policy point of view. I'm now talking about cycling and safety. But for example, this road on the left, you see a small road. It looks like a cycling path, but it is actually a path for farmers, where they drive the tractors. And the tractors, the farm equipment is slow, and it's slowing down the main car traffic on the road. So this project here is not a cycling project, but it is actually aimed at improving the speed of the cars by providing a parallel street for farming equipment and tractors. And that's why it was built. So not for cyclist safety, but for a better flow of cars. And the same goes for bigger projects. This is a project which was planned about 10 years ago. We started planning it, and it is actually open now. And this is a cycling of 300 meters, has about 7,000, guide about 18. It's pretty rural. But the reason why it was built is because it served a key function to towns. The second reason why it was built is that towns in this region said we want to cooperate and build cycling infrastructure, and they just created a voice which could not be unheard for the regional and national government. They worked together and said, we as 5 or 6 or 7 municipalities want to focus on these roads and improve the cycling infrastructure here. So in terms of governance, they created a very strong coalition, and cycling rates actually increased by building these, we call them cycling highways, but you can actually also call them rural connectors linking towns and villages. And these politicians actually, by teaming up, they create this voice, they create this vision, and we were able to open up projects. And last but not least, when you talk about cycling, it is very important. This image really struck me from Austria last week. When you build a motorway or a project like the Limerick Tunnel, cars go quick and they go under your village. And this village in Austria really felt the need that they had to put up a sign saying to car drivers, come visit our village. I've never seen such a sign for cyclists, because they will frequent local shops, they will frequent local businesses, and they will keep actual local and regional communities strong, where motorways actually give people the possibility to travel fast and quick towards the big city centers, and then leaving the rural area a little bit deprived. Thank you for listening.
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, Erik Nyland from the Netherlands Cycling Platform, for informing you and telling you something about cyclotourism in the Netherlands, especially about the cyclotourism product, the route network. I'll show you something later on, but first I will start with telling you something about how cyclotourism is organized in the Netherlands and how my organization, Fietsplatform Cycling Platform, is doing their job. In fact, Fietsplatform Cycling Platform is a kind of an umbrella organization for cyclotourism, public-private partnership, a lot of organizations involved, the ministries, the Ministry of Infrastructure, 12 provinces, a lot of partners related to cycling or tourism. Role of the Fietsplatform is we are functioning as a national coordination center, information center for cyclotourism, and we coordinate the national cycle network, the quality management. And the picture here shows how it's functioning. We have a lot of partners doing part of the job, and we try to make it as a whole network, as a whole product, cycling in Holland. Because coordination is really necessary, and also in the Netherlands we have a lot of departments, provinces, municipalities, public bodies, but also organizations involved with cycling. So there's a need of coordination, there's an opportunity of co-creation, and therefore that's one of our items to say, okay, therefore we like to promote that. This is what we are working at. In fact, this shows how cycle tourism, what it has to do with. Of course, with the infrastructure, landscape, that's the basic. We are working at the route product, making a good product out of the infrastructure for cyclists, having good quality, uniformity, continuity. Together with regional and national promotion organizations, we try to promote cyclotourism in the Netherlands. And promote is also basic to inform the people what are the needs, what are the possibilities, where can you cycle, etc. And of course, the third is also important for us to monitor how many users are there of the cycle routes, and what are the needs now, but also in the future, so that you can change, innovate your product. And that makes the circle round. So this is what we are, Fietsplatform, who we are, and how we are working with a lot of organizations. Then focusing on cyclotourism in the Netherlands. It's good to know, yes, cycling, it's not only mobility in the Netherlands, of course. It's also sport. It's also tourism and recreation, leisure. And in fact, from the 15 billion kilometers that are made by cycle in the Netherlands, it's about 1/3 made for recreational or sport purposes. So what we say, it's more than just only mobility. And looking at the basis for cyclotourism in the Netherlands, and it's in every country, the basis is, of course, the landscape. When you like to enjoy the landscape by bike, you need a good landscape. You need a lot of points of interest so that cycling makes fun. And of course, not only the landscape, but also the very basis is the cycling infrastructure. We have about 90,000 kilometers in the Netherlands where you can cycle. And above of this infrastructure, we have about 33,000 kilometers of route network selected out of the infrastructure. And of course, cyclotourism is not only the infra, but it's also the service and the service products, places to stay, places to rest, good maps, good arrangements, etc. Then when focusing on the infrastructure, but also the route structure, in fact, that's what you say, it's the basis of cyclotourism and also the success of cyclotourism in the Netherlands. This is how it looks like in the Netherlands, the 33,000 kilometers. It's in fact, we have two combined networks, and I will show you how it is functioning. At first, we started a long time ago with a network of long-distance cycle routes. In fact, you can say that you can compare them a little bit with greenways in a way that still it's existing infrastructure, but we selected them knowing that it are good, safe, quiet roads or cycle paths that connects all parts of the Netherlands with each other. And they are specific interesting for cycle touring holidays. Completely signposted, 2 directions, and 26 routes make one route network of long-distance cycle routes. That was the first network, but now since about ended in 2010, we have also a nationwide network of junction routes in the Netherlands now. It's a very fine, dense network, and that connects rural areas with smaller towns, but also the bigger towns. In fact, every place where you want to go to, you can find them by these routes, junction routes. It's quite easy. Every junction has a number, and the signs lead you from junction from junction to junction, choosing point, in fact. And it's a matter of good signing and also related with good mapping. The focus of this network is on day trips, people that want to make day trips from about 30-40 kilometers, or finding a place and saying, I want to go to that place, how can I come there by an attractive route? The junction network makes it very easy to visit almost every place. It's synchronized, combined with the long distance cycle networks. And yeah, you can see it here on the map. The red line is the long distance cycle route. The green are the local regional junction routes. But what is shown here, it's also that it's not only a nationwide network, it's a network of 40 regional networks. And it's important that we together succeed to make it one network, because it's very important for the cyclists. They don't want to experience regional borders. They want to continue the cycle tour, not stopped by a regional border. And there are a lot of route bureaus. There is a cooperation of municipalities, local authorities, working at the maintenance of the route, but also looking at how you can connect very well all those networks together and make it one continuous ongoing network. So all these networks are connected, and this is one of the goals we are standing for. We say the cyclists don't want borders, they want to cycle without borders, especially within one country. And it's not only connected within the Netherlands, this network, but it's also part of some routes are part of the Eurovelo network, the international routes, like, for example, the coast route, the North Sea cycle route, the Rhine cycle route, and recently, last year, we realized together with people in Belgium and France, the Meuse cycle route. Some facts and figures. The use of the network, more than 190 million cycle trips made by the Dutch people, a lot of holidays. And we see that the networks are very important, especially for the people that are not well known in the area that they are visiting. So therefore, a route network helps people to find the good ways, the good routes, the safe routes. And we estimated the economic effects, and you can say it's about 2.4 billion if you count them together. You make it together, spending during the cycle trips, but also spending on equipment. So it's an impressive amount of money. Looking then at the innovation, it's not. It's still going on, the work at the cycle network. This is already what I've told about. Ended not in 2010 but 2015. And looking what we had before, we had a lot of local routes, more than 500. And since we now have a network of junction routes, that's taken over that role, because you don't need the specific themed routes, because of themed routes can put out of this junction network now very easily. You have to follow some numbers, but you can make thousands of thematic routes out of the basic infrastructure, route structure we have in the Netherlands. And a lot of tourist shops or hotels, etc., make their own routes to provide for their guests. But innovation is also our network of long-distance cycle routes. In fact, we say we have now two networks in the Netherlands, the long-distance cycle routes and the regional junction routes. And we say, okay, the network of long-distance cycle routes, because it's all combined, is not necessary anymore. We know we need one nationwide network, the junction routes, and we can focus now on more strategic, interesting national icon routes. Strong themes, international routes, top selection out of the junction routes, high quality and very recognizable as a brand for the cyclist. And the vision is behind this: with less routes, we can create more result by focusing on those 10 routes. So this is what's going on. This network of long-distance cycle routes will be transformed into a network of not a network of 10 national icon routes with a new family line visual identity, with new signs. The old signs are more than 30 years old, so it's necessary at this moment. And this is how it looked like, not the old signs, but one smaller sign with a very clear arrow and color that you can follow. new communication lines, the service info, still some mapping, but of course online with an app. That's the most important part to guide people along the routes. This is how you can find them. Afterwards, you can take a look at this website. And the question, why innovating and why investing in new routes? It's a matter of looking at the consumers and the customers, the changing demands, more freedom of choice. It's important to know that only 10% of people make a cycle holiday by bookable offers. That means 90% need good products, basic products to enjoy a cycle holiday. You see more active holidays, more day trips, more nature, focusing on it, and more kilometers. The e-bikes makes it possible to make longer tours, etc. And why investing? Of course, also the return on investment, not only the economy, but also, for example, spreading the tourism in the Netherlands is an item that not only people are visiting Amsterdam or the coast, but also more inland. And cycle tourism has it to make it more spreading out of the all over the country. Of course, it's environment friendly, no pollution, of course, and there's an item that's interesting to make a change of tourism. The COVID period, we saw that people are more aware of what is possible in their own region and what's healthy, and that's an item we think the next years will be more and more important to look at. And third one, and not looking at the economy, when we don't do anything on innovation, we will lose customers, for example, to from tourism point of view to other countries, because we know we have a name, we have a strong name of being a cycling country, but we see that a lot of other countries are doing good jobs on cycle tourism, and yeah, therefore it's still necessary to keep the product good and alive. Yeah, what's in it for Ireland? I don't know exactly, but I would say it's what we see in the Netherlands is also in Ireland, a lot of changing of demands of tourists, more action, more health, more sustainability. And there's a high potential for cycle tourism also in Ireland, I would say. It's a huge target group, German cyclists, but also, of course, Dutch cyclists who like to cycling and have a holiday, cycle holiday in Ireland. And we think there's a high potential also looking at the landscape and the POIs you have in Ireland. And since the e-bikes are becoming more and more popular, hills are no problem, hills or mountains, and even a challenge for bike sports, sport bikes. All those pictures here show how the Dutch are going on day trips or cycle trips or holiday, always carrying their bike with them or renting a bike or whatever. You find the Dutch everywhere with their bike. So that's my presentation. Thanks, and I hope to enjoy Ireland by bike sometimes.
Thank you, Eric, and also thank you to the others for their presentation. I see we have unfortunately only limited time. When I cluster the questions, and there are many, and please continue discussing with each other through the chat as well. I think there are 4 categories of question. One is the one of money. Basically, there's a shortage of money, and how do we share the limited funds? Like Donegal said, well, what we have to spend is much more than what in other countries might be needed. Suggestions like ring fencing, is that a solution? Maybe that Katrina or Robert can go into that. And then later on, I'll go a little bit about the habits and the public opinion? Thirdly, the distribution between local versus national task. Who's pushing it? Who's doing the designing? How do you make it national, a little bit uniform? And also, how do you get the local authorities more interested, more active, etc.? And finally, there have been some concrete suggestions on how to do things. But first and foremost, it's the money. Catriona, Robert, could you say something from that, and how to do it also with the local Irish context?
Hi, sorry, I think I was on mute there for a little while. I think what we're missing in Ireland is actually the strategic plans. So a lot of the time the funding will come over a number of years, but the most important thing is actually having a plan in place. So when that funding does become available, it's well spent. A little bit of time has to be spent on collaboration, on consultation, because it is the local users who know what's needed in an area. There's plenty of innovative solutions as well, and then prioritising the key infrastructural pieces. But cycling infrastructure is so much cheaper than other transport infrastructure, and that's the key thing that we have to remember, that there's a huge amount of co-benefits as well with cycling infrastructure. So they've already been mentioned. So we're talking about health, activity, and of course huge environmental benefits. So cycling infrastructure is actually very cheap compared to other forms of infrastructure. Perhaps Robert will have more to say there.
Yes, hi everyone. There was some technical problems there with just unmuting the microphone. Yeah, on the funding side, I guess that's probably the one area where, for me, there are less challenges now. There's a clear signal from the government that they will invest in active mobility. I think that's quite clear from the July stimulus package, and all the indications are that the programme for government over the next number of years will actually prioritise spending on active mobility. So I think there is a question. I'd agree with Catriona. It's how that money gets spent and making sure that there's value for money, that it is actually spent on active mobility and enabling people to use active modes. I think the greatest difficulty or the greatest challenge will be actually bringing everyone on board, getting people to align with the need to change. And that's one of the reasons I focused on not just mobility in and of itself. There's something else going on here. People may be brought along in different ways through different arguments, and not just the pure mobility argument. So I think there's definitely the conversation that's needed. In terms of the strategic view, I mean, that needs to come at a national level. I mean, I can look at my own county and try and do what I can here in consultation with community and elected representatives, but I think we need an overarching strategic view on this. We do need a national network, and I think we can see from Eric's presentation the benefit of that when you work from the whole to the part and then filling in those pieces so that we have a network that's valuable. I think the concern is that if we don't have a strategic view on the network, what we will have is very good sections of infrastructure that are not connected. And we know very well the main challenge with that is that being disconnected, it discourages people from using it because they have to go through sections that are less safe. And so we're not going to encourage those more vulnerable users to use the network, which is what we want to do. So there is a challenge there. I think if we had a clear steer on strategic view, and maybe someone like the NTA or the Department of Transport will help with that, and hopefully that's coming. And then I think a more engaged role from local authorities and stakeholders then to try and develop that nationally and locally.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Robert, Catriona. I know that the church also wanted to say something on this from the Dutch perspective, also looking at how much things cost.
Okay, thank you. I'm muted now. Yeah, two things. When I started working in cycling about 10, 12 years ago, I noticed that we, in the region where I worked, Arnhem and Nijmegen, we had 700 million euros available for a light rail or a tram project and 0 for cycling. And in strategic discussions, when you talk about accessibility of a region or revitalization of the countryside, cycling wasn't seen as part of the deal because it was too little, too small. Investments in cycling didn't really matter. So they weren't considered as on this big decision-making table on the national level. And one of the tricks we used is to use these cycling highways or maybe the greenways in Ireland to say, hey, we make this project bigger. And by making them bigger, they suddenly found a place on the discussion table for regional and national governments, and they were financed also by national and regional governments. So that's actually one major thing in terms of finances which could work. Regarding, I'm sorry, the second question, Mr. Ambassador?
Mm-hmm. No, that was it at the moment. Now there's the second issue, but that's very much more for Robert and for Catriona, maybe a little bit less for you, is how to get the local buy-in. How can we make sure that people accept it, especially if the advantages are not directly for them, but more for the general public? Robert, can you go into that?
Yeah, just the issue with unmuting there. How to bring people along? I guess, and this is my point. And I hope I made it in the presentation, that it doesn't seem to be enough to say that active mobility is good. It doesn't seem to be enough to say that we have to do it for safety reasons. It doesn't seem to be enough to say it's about sustainability. And you're looking at all those arguments and say, well, they're all rational arguments, and I'm not sure that it's convincing enough of people. And then you have to come back and say, well, is there another way of looking at it? And I think if people see that there's a benefit for them and their community, and they can live, I guess, they can have a lifestyle that's more livable is the word, but more relaxed, allows them to do things in their own locality, allows them to move around freely and relatively quickly. But that's a wider issue. And I think about the drivers, maybe in other countries, like in the Netherlands, it was the safety issue. In Denmark, it was the energy crisis in the 70s. What is our driver? Is it COVID? Is that jolting everybody to do something differently? And I think it is a wider conversation, because I think it's become quite divisive in Ireland, the issue of cycling and mobility. And I think that needs to be broadened. And one of the things I always look at is, can we look at including walking and cycling in that same conversation? We oftentimes bring that away, but we actually have a lack of a safe and connected walking network, never mind cycling. So we need to look at that also. So I think that's a way of bringing people along. I think we need to talk to businesses about the benefits of mobility and active mobility, that it benefits the local economy. We have to look at the benefits socially, allows people to congregate, to spend time, and obviously those benefits on health, environment, and safety. So I think there's a long journey ahead. I think it's a conversation, and I think maybe that can happen best at a local level. And I actually think right down to local villages, where you engage with residents, local community groups and businesses, to have a conversation with them about the future of their place or their locality.
Thank you very much, Robert. I think that's indeed very helpful. The question is indeed whether there's always a conflict of interest, or whether it's something that, like you can have bicycle parking, which is not competing with car parking, but is actually complementary to. And I think this is also where often you have complementary ways of transport for complementary goals. And if you have 8 people on the bicycle, that means maybe 1 less parking space, but it also means 8 less people on the road, so your car can move on much faster. Now, when it comes to the infrastructure, and this would be my final question, who is pushing it? Is it the national authorities? Is it the local authorities? Who are doing the designs here? I know that you came up with your own design for the things along the coastal route. Would it be good to have some kind of national model that you use for those kind of things, so that everybody recognizes them and there's more unity in the design area? What do you think, Robert? What is, Catriona, what do you think?
Maybe I'll jump in just while I'm unmuted at the moment. Yes, I think there absolutely has to be national guidance, and also maybe national support to the local authorities. And I know that local authorities are looking at putting cycling officers in place, you know, so that will help as well with the overall connected picture. But I think the local communities and the cyclists have a key role into shaping the local networks and the local connections. And they also have that knowledge about maybe identifying those parallel routes that have been spoken about as well. So I know, like at the moment in Kilkenny, we're developing our local transport plan, and that public engagement piece will be hugely important when it comes to identifying our cycling route and having ambition for our cycling routes as well. And what's key about the cycle routes, I think, is that, you know, too often our cycle networks only cater for the brave and the bold. You know, if we do want to bring all cyclists, if we want to give everybody the opportunity to cycle, then locals have to be involved in designing those routes. So that's, I suppose, that's where I think local collaboration is hugely important.
And then the question is also, of course, how do you get the landowners to work with you? I know the famous story of the whole pieces of cycling paths being blocked by one landowner for 100 meters because he says, I have to pay if somebody gets an accident on that 100 meter. And hence, what do you do about that? How do you get the buy-in from everyone?
I think one little thing that has happened during COVID is there has been this massive disruption in the way everybody travels, and people have possibly seen the opportunities that are there, and they see maybe what the community wants. And I know, for example, with the school that we worked with that Park and Stride location, that was provided by the Kilkenny Agricultural Society because they saw the benefits to the community. People have to be able to see the benefits. They have to be able to see the place making the vibrancy that cyclists and pedestrians can bring to a place. And but that, you know, it is always challenging. It is always challenging with landowners. But that's one good story that we've had lately in the last couple of months.
Okay, well, looking at the clock, I know there's very many more questions that are there, and I'm glad to say also a lot of discussion in the chat function on what would be possible, how we could, on a national level in Ireland, work together, learn from each other. I could only stimulate that. At the same time, we are now 2:10, so I'm afraid that the time is up. I would like to thank our speakers, Catriona, Robert, Eric, George, for your presentations and for answering all the questions. I would like to thank the Dutch Cycling Embassy for making this event possible. And I would like to thank my colleagues at the embassy. If you have any other questions, please email us at dub@minbuza.nl. And you can see it on the screen right now. And then we will gladly help you any further. And it has finally, thank you, the audience, for also coming up with all the suggestions. You will get the slides in the coming days, hopefully tomorrow. And I will take on board what you have said and use it in my conversations with the authorities, both at the national level and at the local level, to see how we can cooperate further between the Netherlands and Ireland in the years ahead in these difficult times. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the near future again.